After the occupation of Lombardy, according to the thoughts of Hofkriegsrat, the Austrian Military Council, and Emperor Franz II, the main goals set for the army had been accomplished. The Austrians demanded that Suvorov's attention be focused on the siege of fortresses such as Mantua, Pizzighettone, the citadel of Milan, and others. Franz II's rescript, written under the influence of the head of the Hofkriegsrat, Tugut, cut down the strategic options of the field marshal. I must, however, express my wish that you, in accordance with the instruction I gave you in explanation of my thoughts before your departure from Vienna, confine your main actions to the left bank of the Po. Field Marshal worried about the possibility of movement of MacDonald's army from Naples to the north. Suvorov, despite demands not to take active steps on the right bank, could not leave the possibility of the armies of Moreau and MacDonald to combine. Field Marshal dictated the plan to Schaedler, who was surprised at the speed with which it was drawn up. Tugut, on receiving Suvorov's plan, allowed him only to occupy some fortress on the right bank, nothing more. Suvorov's plan was as follows. Vukasovic was to cross the Ticino, go through Novara, occupy Vercelli, and send detachments to Candia and Trino, while supporting the popular liberation movement against the French. Rosenberg's Russian troops marched through Pavia, along the left bank of the Po towards Valenza, threatening the important fortress of Alessandria from the north. Bagration's vanguard crosses the Po and marches across the Voghera to Tortona, a powerful stronghold, then occupies the fortresses of Novi and Gavi, thus cutting off Moreau from the French forces in Genoa. Bagration is reinforced by Zopp's and Frelich's Austrian divisions under the general command of Melas. Ott's forces were to move to Modena and, joining Austrian reinforcements from the left bank of the Po, push back the French forces of Gautier and Montrichard to the south. To cover Milan and the entire northern flank of the Allied army should troops of Prince Rogan and Strauch. Suvorov instructed Strauch to watch the pass of St. Bernard, assuming the movement of the French from there. Meanwhile, Moreau had retreated with Grenier's division to Turin, where he found the inhabitants in an excited mood, evidently disloyal to the French. Leaving General Fiorella's 3,400 men in the city, he moved with the rest of his troops towards Valenza to join Victor. The French position between Valenza and Alessandria gave two options in any case: to help Turin and to hit the rear of the enemy if he went against MacDonald to the southeast. It should be understood that at first, the two commanders-in-chief did not have accurate information about each other and acted almost blindly. Bagration crossed the Po on May 5th and headed for Tortona. Approaching the fortress, he discovered the French forces, contrary to reports that Tortona was not occupied. Bagration stopped at Voghera and began to observe the French. On May 6th, the Austrians of Melas crossed. On May 9th, the Austrian troops occupied Tortona. Schaedler took an active part in this. In the hands of the French remained only the citadel. Meanwhile, the son of the Russian Emperor Constantine Pavlovich arrived to the army. In his 20s, he was eager to get into the heat of battle. He arrived to the Rosenberg's Russian troops. Suvorov received information that Valenza was abandoned and instructed Rosenberg to take it. The troops began to build a raft to cross opposite the village of Bassignano. The Russians prepared the crossing so openly that Moreau thought it was just a demonstration and sent Grenier's main forces south. Meanwhile, Suvorov received information that Valenza occupied by the French. He immediately sent an order to Rosenberg to abandon the crossing and move to cross on the right bank to the main forces. Rosenberg received the order the moment the raft was ready. On May 12th, seeing the weakness of the French, Rosenberg still hesitated whether to cross with all the forces here. But then Constantine said to him, "I see, Your Excellency, that you are used to serve in the Crimea. It was calmer there, and you never saw the enemy in your eyes." The old and experienced General Rosenberg was insulted and ordered Chubarov's vanguard to cross. The Russians were initially successful, but Grenier's troops and Moreau himself quickly arrived. After a hard and desperate battle, the Russians began to retreat to an island formed by the Po River. French artillery inflicted terrible losses on the close ranks of the Russians on the island. The situation was made even worse by the fact that the raft was swept away by the river, and it was only possible to cross completely to the left bank after some time. The French, having suffered 600 casualties, inflicted twice as many losses on the Russians, about 1,200 men. Suvorov was furious. He ordered Rosenberg to cross on the right bank, adding a short note, without losing a minute immediately to execute this or under military court. Word soon reached him of Constantine's brave but foolish behavior in the Battle of Bassignana. He had a tough conversation with him, after which the Grand Duke left with tears in his eyes. From that moment on, Constantine fully recognized the Suvorov's authority. Meanwhile, the fortress of Piedmont capitulated, and Kaim's forces marched to the right bank of the Po. On May 15th, Bagration took Novi. On May 16th, Suvorov suddenly decides to transfer most of the army back to the left bank. Why? News has reached that MacDonald is delayed on his way from Naples. There were even rumors that he would stay there at all. News also arrived that Lecourbe had defeated Prince Rogan in the north, threatening Lombardy. It should be added that from everywhere, Suvorov received warnings of some 20,000 reinforcements to Moreau's army from France across the Alps. All this changed Suvorov's plans. He ordered Hohenzollern, who was besieging the citadel of Milan, to march with half of the forces to reinforce Prince Rogan and Strauch. On the right bank, Suvorov left the troops of Seckendorf, who was watching Moreau and besieging the citadel of Tortona, and Ott, who was watching the French forces of Gautier and Montrichard in Tuscany and Modena. All other troops moved to the north. This maneuver also allowed the Allies to bypass the strong French positions at Alessandria and strike Moreau in the rear. In fact, Moreau did not expect any significant reinforcements. At this time, he probably thought that Suvorov, with the main forces, moved against MacDonald. He decided to move Victor's division of 7,500 men in order to defeat a separate enemy corps and maintain contact with Genoa. Had he started the offensive a day later, it might have been successful. But Victor began the crossing on the morning of May 16th. He pushed the Cossacks from Marengo and headed towards San Giuliano. The Austrian camp fell into confusion. Kaim refused to lead his division into battle, referring to exhaustion after the march. Then, Lusignan energetically led his division to meet Victor. In the First Battle of Marengo, all the weight of the battle lay on the Austrians, who fought well. Hearing the rumble of cannons, Bagration appeared on the battlefield, but strangely for him, did not act very actively. After a stubborn battle, Victor, having lost 500 men, retreated back across the river. Moreau lost hope of making contact with Genoa through Tortona and ordered a retreat. Victor's division without cannons moved south through Acqui to the Genoese Riviera. Moreau, with Grenier's division and all the wagons, retreated westward through Sheva and Kani. Suvorov, gathering a force of 30,000 men in a fist, moved on Turin. The population of Piedmont was mostly happy about the arrival of the Allies. Back in early May, Suvorov issued a proclamation to the Piedmontese troops. He urged them to join the Allies, promised the return of the King of Sardinia, deposed by the French last year. The Austrians, however, were strongly opposed the idea. Here showed the self-interest of the Austrians, who wanted not only to return Lombardy, but also to conquer Piedmont for themselves. Suvorov wanted to recreate a Piedmontese army of up to 20,000 men. It would be very useful for garrison service. He even tried to reassure Hofkriegsrat that it could be disbanded easily. But the Austrians destroyed that idea completely. And the Sardinian king, they did not let him come to Turin at all. From this moment on, relations between the Russians and the Austrians began to deteriorate rapidly, as Emperor Paul I sent Russian troops to restore the legitimate governments. On May 21st, the fortress of Ferrara in the east capitulated, facilitating the siege of Mantua. On May 23rd, the citadel of Milan capitulated. The French were pushed out of the Graubünden region, freeing 15,000 men of Bellegarde for action in Italy. Suvorov ordered him to march on Alessandria. At that time, he also sends instructions to Ott for action against Gautier and Montrichard. Suvorov, approaching Turin, surrounded the city on three sides. Vukasovic, who was closer than the rest of the army, was in contact with the commander of the National Guard in the city, who opened the gates to him on the morning of May 26th. Fiorella and his forces were pushed back into the citadel. Suvorov entered the city in triumph. Meanwhile, the whole of Piedmont was in flames. Numerous militias were active in the country, trying to prevent Moreau's retreat. When the militia occupied Cheva, Suvorov ordered Seckendorf to send there a small detachment to hold the fortress. The force arrived in time. The French were unable to recapture Cheva, with problems, but Moreau completely retreated to the Genoese Riviera. The troops of Klenau, in contact with which Ott and his division were to act, were suddenly recalled completely to the siege of Mantua. Hofkriegsrat did this, without even wishing to inform Suvorov about it. The field marshal was extremely annoyed. He wrote a letter to the Russian ambassador in Vienna, Razumovsky. "If the operations are commanded by Hofkriegsrat, then I have no need here, and I now want to go home. This cabinet decree has destroyed the order of all my operations. I had to stop here for a while to correct it." MacDonald is not beaten. He joins with Moreau. Every private Austrian general is not by one interior, but in everything belongs to Hofkriegsrat. So he has the right to plot according to his predilections and prejudices. According to these, Hofkriegsrat from four corners has the right to command them and to bind me. In early June, MacDonald's army finally appeared in northern Italy. The two French commanders began to coordinate a joint crushing blow against the Allies. One of the major crises of the campaign had arrived.